do you want to live deliciously? I guess.
Where he was like, it pissed me off though. He was like, "You want fancy dress?" I was like, "That she doesn't care about fancy.
She just wants her family back, bud.
She just wants her family to be alive. Like, don't patronize me.
You want fancy dresses,
patriarchal demon. Get
I
out
want
of here.
like the corn to grow. Hi, I'm Gabe.
And I'm Kat. And
I be the Witch of the Wood. Yeah.
Yeah.
I signed his book and
Did you, Gabe?
I live deliciously.
Sure.
I wouldn't do that. It sounds bad.
I'm glad I didn't live back then, because this look isn't really working for me.
I agree. I really hate this cloak. I'm really itchy. Yeah. There's a lot of reasons why I'm glad that I don't live in the 1600s.
Honestly,
period.
All of it was bad. I'm happy, as much as like now sucks. I'm happy I live now.
Yeah.
Because like, why?
There
was no good time.
Yeah.
Before. I
have no, whatever that word is, where you feel nostalgic for a time you didn't exist in. I don't have that. I wasn't born in the wrong time. I was right on time. I was right here. This is where I was supposed to be, because I would have been dead. And maybe I was, if there's past lives. I didn't last long over there.
So.
And so, yeah. We are the Ghouls Next Door. We are not the Witch of the Wood. And we're a media literacy show from a horror lens. We explore the real life, historical, and witchcraft reasonings behind our cinematic fears. And we're kicking off a new series during October. They'll probably sprinkle in throughout. And it is about satanic panic. Talking about the spooky idea that there's a bad guy.
Yeah. And I'm just like, it's so much more about control than any of that. It's silly. Goose. Like, what do you mean? Like,
yeah, hysteria. We are talking about The Witch today. This is the second time the Ghouls are covering The Witch. However, the first time we covered The Witch was our 4th episode. So
I straight don't remember.
It's not good.
I believe that.
It's a lot of like we laugh now, but it was like all laugh, all loud. We were certainly saying things because it's hard to not know what we're talking about, but we did laugh a lot about it being called the Vivitch. So 2 V's instead of W. I will say that a Google search said that the W was widely used as far back as like the 1200s. So it should be a W.
They don't need to be doing that. Yeah.
For all the extra. But he did do a lot of work to make it feel authentic. And that's where he gets a lot of credit. I was telling Kat before we start recording this that if you are a fan of The Witch as a film, then I highly recommend a book called Slewfoot by Brom, and it is so good. Set in colonial times, similar to this, but giving you the crucible kind of thing, but with more witchcraft and wizardry there. And it's beautifully done as far as folklore goes. It hurt to read. Whereas this, I felt a lot of sadness. It was really relentless in the book, and it felt bleak and even harder than this. And the good for her vibes were strong. Like, I was ready. I was like, I can't wait for Satan to come. I can't wait for him, and it's gonna be nice. It's a very unique story, but it has the same, like, it takes place in the same time. And if you were looking for that good for her, which, like, using witchcraft during a time when you would have been executed just for not tucking your hair away in your bonnet, then that is a good story for you. I think this movie is actually really good. I know it's like a love-hate spectrum for people. I don't know if I say I love it, but I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it last time.
Yeah, like, it's definitely, like, parts of it where you're like, "Oh, geez, I wish that didn't happen." But, it's
Yeah.
definitely super interesting, and the suspense is, like, satisfying. Like, even when you know what's gonna happen, it's, like, a little scary. Like, because you, like,
Yeah.
are like, "Oh, geez, they're lost in the woods. Oh, no." They say witches are out, like, it's creepy.
Mm-hmm.
They got creepy
Yeah.
things going
Children are
on.
missing. Like, we're
Yeah.
out in the woods.
Also, like, ew, back then.
And it was just all like,
Never feel joy.
yeah, you can't feel joy and happiness because that was your sin seeping through. That was the original sin, like knowing things. You're supposed to feel bad that you were sinful. And
Yeah.
if there's a moment where you're not feeling bad, then you've messed up.
Yeah.
Then now you're failing because you are condemned to hell up until you continue to live your life piously and
Yeah.
all that jazz. But I'll tell you about this film, and then Kat will tell you about the history of this place and why we don't time travel. So, The Witch, a New England folklore, is from 2015, and it's about a family in 1630s New England is torn apart by the forces of witchcraft, black magic, and possession. It's directed by Robert Eggers, and this is like his debut film. He put a lot of effort into it. The Witch is a psychological folklore horror film that offers us a slow descent into a puritanical satanic panic, which is why it's intersection. And like I said, it is set in 1630s New England. And the story follows a devoutly Christian family that is exiled from their Puritan settlement and forced to live on the edge of a dark forest. I didn't pick this up when I was watching it, but I read about it, and people say they were kicked out because of a difference of interpretation of the text. Yeah. So because the father, Abraham, read the text a certain way, it wasn't in line with the Puritans, so they were cast out.
Yeah, that's what they did.
Yeah. So as tensions rise, their crops fail, and strange occurrences plague the family, they begin to suspect supernatural forces are at work. And after one son is abducted, first believed to be by wolves and later by the Witch of the Wood, the parents consider selling off their eldest daughter, Thomasin, to a family in town. It made sense. They were like, one less mouth to feed. They can get some money, and she's old.
Yeah.
So Thomasin and her brother Caleb take to the woods in search of food to avoid this fate. And only this time, Caleb doesn't return with Thomasin, and she quickly becomes a focus of suspicion as paranoia builds and the family descends into madness, believing her to be possessed by the devil and having written her name upon his book.
She didn't even do it.
They never do. They never do.
Yeah.
And it's so sad because he was gonna go out all by himself. She just went because she was like, "Let me protect you." So, taking a note from the Crucible, Thomasin's younger siblings accuse her of witchcraft, and she them in turn. It's literally like, but they're the witches. Which honestly, I believe Thomasin. I was like, they do be talking to Black Phillip a lot, and it's like, where did Marcy hear that stuff? Like, I guess in the
she's the first one who's like, I'd be the Witch of the Wood. And it's like, yeah, you little annoying kid.
She did. She straight up said it. I was like, she's her. But the delicate thread unspools around them, leading to many deaths and a questionable ending. It's questionable, like, in how it's received, and I didn't agree. And all the text, all the all the documents I found, people were like saying it's one thing, and I was like, was everyone watching the same movie I was watching?
No.
And I just when we were about to record this found one little slice of a thing that actually said what I was thinking. So yay them. But the film explores themes of religious fanaticism, isolation, fear of the unknown, all while maintaining a slow burn tension and eerie atmosphere. It culminates in a chilling examination of witchcraft folklore and societal anxieties of the time, very clearly on display. And Puritans believed in the constant presence of evil and the devil, often associating misfortune with sin or witchcraft. And this worldview shaped every aspect of their lives, from their relationship with God to their interactions with one another, which is why it's so easy for them to fall into that fanaticism and make the choices that they did.
Yeah.
Cinematically, Eggers did his research, insisting on period-appropriate decor, set design. He did these like mud manure walls, the wardrobe, and language. He read read over a lot of texts from the time, or what we have rumored to be texts of the time, and forced them to speak in that old-timey way very specifically. The shots are often wide, expansive, and isolating, really bringing home that the family truly is alone in these woods. Like, it's eerily quiet. There's nothing there. It's just them and them being sad. The Witch is an atmospheric film that captures the bleak, depressing reality of puritanical early America, as we said, because not only were the settlers battling against a hostile environment, take a hint, colonizers, I don't want you there, they struggled to adapt to the new land's unyielding climate and soil, which resisted their familiar crops and culture. That's why they had to learn from the natives who were there. Then they were mean. Which is putting it lightly. Life was further complicated by a rigid society steeped in fear and religious extremism. And while Kat will dive deeper into Puritan culture, a key element here is the intense belief that Satan was alive, like he was a real thing that existed, and he was active in this world. And in a time of great need and despair, the colonies were seen as especially vulnerable to his influence, and the church gave its blessing to punish anyone suspected of signing his book. So he was a real thing. He was corrupting them because they were already in danger. And so it's not a quick or a far leap for someone to jump to the conclusion that there's a witch, right? The belief system quickly became a tool to control the populace, many of whom had come to the New World seeking freedom and a fresh start. Anyone who didn't fit into the narrow conformist mold of a good community member, essentially obedient, quiet, and without independent thoughts, became easy targets for cruel and often brutal punishment. And the fear of Satan, combined with the social pressures of this new world, turned suspicion and accusation into powerful weapons and caused a good number of deaths. The crucible is not real, but the witch trials and like people dying in horrific, torturous ways by the church was in fact real. And this is the world that Thomasin finds herself in, thrust from one harsh community into an even harsher wilderness. If we choose to overlook the supernatural elements, right, the witch and Black Phillip, if we say they're just a figment of their imagination, they're not real in this story, and instead view the film as a cautionary tale of the time, it highlights just how fragile trust, love, and belief were during that period. So that's kind of how I was approaching it. Like if they're not real and what's happening to them is like situations, this is like real, you know, like I'm supposed to interpret this as real life, then it just kind of shows how easily things could be falling apart, you know, just hanging on by a thread. So isolated and struggling to survive, the family becomes increasingly paranoid and consumed by fear of divine punishment, right? And the tension between their unwavering faith in the unforgiving natural world, embodied by this ominous dark forest, creates a pervasive atmosphere of dread. It's just constantly depressing. Like their only happiness is when they're thinking back to how it was before. Like, remember we had windows?
There was
right?
glass.
And then the
in
boy's
them.
like, I don't remember glass windows. I don't, because he's suppressing that because it's really sad to think that now we live in a world without glass windows. Or like, I think more importantly than the windows was the father in that memory that she's sharing, was very affectionate and kind to their mother. Like he was teasing her. Right. And it's not to say that they're not happy together now, but they're not really happy together now. But it's clear that they had this really beautiful love that the kids really appreciated at some point.
And like life was more stable in England financially and whatever. Like they were used to the land. It was not strange to them.
Yeah.
Survival was more likely where they were. And then they came to a place where
was there.
survival was not likely at all. So.
Exactly. And their descent into suspicion and hysteria shows how easily fear can erode familial bonds and how vulnerable people were to the unknown forces they believed governed their lives. Right. And so we see how the cards are stacked against Thomasin, leading to her inevitable accusation of witchcraft. So she was the last one to see the baby Samuel before he was abducted. She's the last one to see Caleb before he disappeared in the woods. And her playful teasing of her siblings was twisted into something sinister. So she just harmlessly is teasing her younger sister, who is annoying. I'll be the witch of the wood. She's like, no, I'm the witch of the wood, actually. Yeah. I signed his book, like, to scare her and send her away. And of course, then that gets twisted on her and she can't even argue against it. Yeah. Where she's like, she told me with her own mouth. And she's like, well, okay.
I technically did. It was jokes. It was jokes. Yeah. And you can't joke. I think
we're missing context here.
Yeah.
But also, joking isn't really allowed. So I am sorry about that. Especially about something so heavy. And later, she's even linked to Caleb's delirious, tragic demise. Because she was the last one to see him. She's the one who finds him in the rain, and he's naked. And then he confirms what the twins are saying, as he says, like, those horrible things. Poor boy probably just ate some berries.
Yeah.
Probably ate some berries in the woods, and Samuel probably got eaten by some wolves.
Yeah, I also like, they didn't know the plants, so it's like super real that there's like tons of plants that can cause hallucinations and delusions. Except, like, there was that entire family, I saw a story on TikTok that was like being poisoned by leaves. You shared it with me, like their drain
and they
pipe.
thought it was a haunted house.
Yeah, no, but they all just lost their minds because they were poisoned.
Yeah, they were poisoned and they were hallucinating. They were high as hell, and so they were having hallucinations, and they were like, they're ghosts. And it's like, no, you just ate some berries, you just had some leaves, the mushroom. Like, he was hungry. He was lost out there. You telling me he didn't eat something?
Yeah,
he's he found. He found the house in the woods. No, what he found was a bunch of mushrooms.
Yeah.
And he's a child, so he ate them. Anyway, on my first watch, I did feel this strong sense of that good for her when she rose into the sky, dancing with the other witches. Like, you see that she's finally happy. Like, she's never smiled, except when she had that one memory, right?
Yeah.
And there's like the tempting offer of Black Phillip, like, do you want to live deliciously? I guess.
When he was like, it pissed me off though. He was like, you want fancy dress? I was like, that she doesn't care about fancy.
She just wants her family back, but
she just wants her family to be alive. Like, don't patronize me.
You want fancy dresses.
Patriarchal demon.
I want like the corn to grow.
I want love, man.
Yeah. I love
stupid
I will say
stuff.
In Slewfoot, like, that's one of the things is like the corn. And that's what she asked for. She asked for corn. Like, it just felt so much more realistic, Yeah, I agree. I also didn't like that he kind of looked like a conquistador behind her. And I was just like, it's like, why would he look like that? Anyway, at the time, like, when I first watched it, and when you're hearing like the good for her and the living deliciously and just the narratives that come intertwined with this idea of like the witches, right? Like, we're the daughters of the witches you didn't burn, Yeah. It's like, no, honey. No. You're the daughters of the ladies who were pointing at the ladies who got burned.
Yeah.
Sorry. But like, that empowerment that comes with that narrative that people have twisted. That's like, it's separated itself from the actual circumstances and become this like tale of like women. So it felt justified when I first watched it, like her rising up, and I was like, because I was like, her family had been cruel to her. She deserved that freedom, that release from the torment that they put her through. However, on my recent watch, I find myself questioning whether Thomasin really actually was treated cruelly. I was like, I don't think she was. Wait a second. Because, like, yes, her mom was harsh, right? She did accuse her of witchcraft. That was, of course, after she suffered, like, a traumatic break. Like, she was not all there at the time of witchcraft. She was also just, like, a overbearing mom who was like, do your chores. Did you do your chores?
Yeah.
Under a lot of stress, like, where's my jewelry? Like, or not my jewelry, my cup. Like,
It was like typical mom stuff in a patriarchal society that doesn't value the minds, bodies, or works of women.
Exactly. That's what she was. Like, she's not. It
wasn't great. The family that did that. It was the society. It was like, there's a system. It's not the individual necessarily.
And the thing is, like, I do feel like she could have been much worse. Like, I never felt like any of the things she did was extra, where she like just plainly hated her kid. I don't feel that. And even when the kid like is nice and like is like, I'll bring the cows in, Mom.
Yeah,
like,
she was sweet.
Would it please you? Like, were it to please you? And the mom's like, yeah, like, oh my God, like I'm upset and you're trying to take care of me. Like, there was clear throughout the whole thing. There's clear love. And even with the parents discussing selling her off right there, it's not like they're eager to do that. They're like, it's about that time. And, I like those things, right? Like the stuff that she said and what the family was doing does, through like our modern lens, seem barbaric and cruel. But at the time period, it makes sense, right? Despite all this, I do believe her family genuinely loved her. Their actions, though misguided, were shaped by the harsh realities of their world and their deep-rooted beliefs. Like an explanation, not like an excuse. I think there's better ways to handle it, but they were all freaking out. Like they were trapped in fear and desperation. And even still, their love for Thomasin still existed beneath the surface, even as everything unraveled. Like, it really was there.
Yeah.
Like I said, her mother suffered and endured immense heartbreak and trauma, which likely contributed to her delusions, right? Especially as a deeply religious woman who had been forced to leave 2 homes and now faces the devastating loss of her children in a helpless isolation. Like, she's alone. She lost her kids. She feels helpless, even more than women usually did. Like, I get it.
Yeah.
Like, if anyone sympathizes with that lady, it is me. I'm like, oh my God.
And like, she had no choice in even moving there. Like,
exactly.
She could have wanted to stay in England and then couldn't because women weren't seen as people and you had to go where your husband went. Like,
and her cup, it was her father's cup.
Yeah.
He sold it.
Yeah.
Because it was his. Her. It's not hers. And he still, I will say, he did that, but the fact that he felt even kind of bad is like A+ of a man. Of the time period. Yeah. I was like, whoa, oh my God.
She was nice for her husband. There were like moments where like she hit him and he didn't like beat the crap out of her. And I was like, wow, he's so nice for that time. For men. Like, men did not care. They were tools. They were a method for children. Her. And he actually cared about her. So like that was different.
He really did. He loved her. He apologized. Like, it was he really, like, I did not expect to like him. I don't usually.
I sympathized with him for sure. Yeah,
I really did. Right. And so, like, kind of going back to the circumstances, right, that are, explained away and why love was still there. Right. So, like, even though Thomasin, for her age in that time period is considered quite old. So both Kat and I were like, it's kind of strange that she still lives at home and she hasn't been married off yet. So that also made sense why the parents were considering it. And despite the growing tension, I never felt the father lacked love for his children or his wife, which is unexpected for a film set in this era. Right? Even as the younger children accuse Thomasin of being a witch, he refuses to believe them and tries to silence the chaos. His only desire is to mourn and keep his family together, yet they all spiral deeper into religious hysteria. Like, he puts them outside because he's like, y'all need to just work it out. He doesn't, like, as religious as he is, and he's like, there might be some truth to that, but I'm going to admit, we're all really stressed out right now. None of us are thinking
like,
clearly.
Y'all are saying stuff to her while she's like devastated over the loss of her son. Like, don't be doing this right now. Sit in the shed where I'm going to calm your mom down.
Yeah.
We're going to work this out.
Like, he's feeling guilty for a variety of reasons and nervous, and just like he feels at fault. Like, there really was a humanness to him where, like, it would have been so easy to give us a narrative where he's cruel, he treats her like property, he abuses her, he's like, gives her weird looks. Like, I'll admit, like, Caleb was giving her weird looks, but again, it's a time period and like she's the only girl around. It's not his mom. Like, it's just weird, like, it was a weird, I'm not gonna like excuse his behavior, but at the very least, the dad wasn't doing that. Right.
Yeah,
like,
no,
he respected her. That was his kid, And I think there was a real beauty in their relationship. Like, he trusted her and confided in her and believed in her capacity as like a capable adult person more even than the mom did.
Yeah.
Because the mom grew up in a world where she wasn't allowed to do that. Right.
Yeah.
And he did, you know, not admit that he stole the cup. But he did come out later and he admitted it.
Yeah, it's just like normal family stuff under the situations of horrific oppression.
Exactly.
So, like, yeah, it was like a whole thing. But yeah, they loved each other. You could tell, like, the family cared for each other. The only ones that were a little weird were the twins, and that's because they were
just
really
weird
young.
kids. They were weird kids at the time. And all the while, Abraham, this father, he just bears the weight of his decisions while remarkably listening to his wife, making him one of the most unique husbands in all of horror film. Okay, because she was like, he was going to go to the town. And she was like, wait. She's like, no, you can't go to town. She's like freaking out. And he's like, what do you want? I was like, whoa, stop the presses. I was like, who is this? What is this? Is this what a man is? I never knew. It was insane. Like, he's like, what can I do to make you feel better? Like, what can I do for you? And I was like, why does she matter to you? You know, like, because at that time period, she wouldn't. And so that
it wasn't like Rosemary's Baby where they were like, we can just get another one. Like, what? That's not what you say to your wife.
He was like, this is
she's not just a children factory, bro.
Exactly.
He didn't treat her like that, which was nice.
She was a partner in all things except like, and he like tried to like, he tried to consider her in a lot of his actions. So, and I feel his heart broke when her heart broke. Like, truly. Unlike The Crucible, which leaves readers and viewers outraged at the society, the girls, and the church, The Witch evokes a profound sense of sadness by the end. Like I said, The Crucible brings out where are the daughters of the witches who didn't burn. The Witch brings out the tissues.
Yeah.
Because Thomasin, who fought so hard for her family, is ultimately stripped of everything, left with no choice but to sign away her soul. Right. And like I said, it was really hard to find any articles that agreed with me that this was not a tale of empowerment. And I did find one on Killscreen because Anya Taylor-Joy was asked, like, do you think it's an empowerment? And she's like, yeah, because she finally made her own choice. And if she couldn't go back to the plantation and she couldn't live in the woods, or like run the farm because she's a woman. So she chose quotations to sign up with the devil. And this person in this article was like, that's not a choice. Just what I was saying as I was reading that. I was like, that's literally the absence of choice. She had no other choice. And so she sold it away. It's like so creepy too, because of the way he's saying that. Like, he's like, you want to live deliciously, take off your clothes. Yeah. And she's like, okay, this whole time, you know, she's like struggled against her growing body like that. It's a coming of age tale. It is in the background of everything, right? It's the fact that she's going to get sold. It's the fact that her brother looks at her that way. It's the fact that her mom is being so like uptight about things and she's just trying to live her life, stressed against like what the future means, which is less freedom. And all the while, this conquistador jackass is like, live deliciously. Like, fuck off.
Yeah, like, you literally just murdered my whole family. Like, why? That's not what I wanted. Like, you were talking to Mercy. Mercy could go live deliciously, I guess. Like, whatever.
Yeah,
but that's
also
not
as a
for
child,
me.
you're a creep. Like, you know, like, I did not leave that feeling like, yes, girl.
No. Yeah, like, she just, it wasn't, as you said, it wasn't a choice. It was like, there wasn't another option, so Satan won, I guess. Like, and like, that sucks.
That sucks.
Because that's not freedom. That's not like, oh, we can finally be ourselves and like be who we want to be and do whatever we want. It's like, nah, you gotta go like steal babies and
like if the cost is like bathe yourself in the infant blood to look young forever, I don't want to do that. Like, I just like, I'll opt out of that. Like, no thanks. I just wanted to be able to exist. Like, like if your two choices with this religion, right, is like God, who doesn't let you to experience any happiness, or Satan, who like strips you naked and makes you do things anyway, like, I don't want to do any of those things.
None of them are
one
happiness.
of those things feels empowering at all. And like, just because he's the opposite of God, like, doesn't mean it's good, you know, because people are like, oh, we hate God. Like, you can hate both of them. It's like, you know, because if the devil was real all along, so like before when I was like, let's pretend he's not real, here's what the story is. If we go back, the witch really did steal the baby, the Black Phillip goat was really talking to them kids, like, if he was real all along, if he had truly been whispering to the kids and orchestrating this elaborate scheme, then no one stood a chance ever. The illusion of choice is there because he went to extreme lengths to bring this one girl under his control, which feels absurdly excessive. It is extra AF. Like how far back does this scheme go? Does it go, like, did he corrupt Abraham inside the plantation? Did he corrupt him all the way across the sea to bring him here in the first place? Like, we don't know how far that goes and how little control they have in it. So if he is real, it's just like that, and none of that feels empowering at all to me. It feels sinister and evil. And that's why I feel like people, like, miss out when they interpret it as that, and they're like I saw one video and they used the wrong name. They said, like, why did Anya choose what she did, which is the name of the actress. And I was like, her name is Thompson, first of all. But it was like, why'd she made those decisions? I was like, she didn't. Yeah. The answer is she didn't make the decision. So I'm not watching this. You're stupid. You didn't even use the right name, but whatever. All I say is, like, I couldn't find anyone who was saying what I was saying. So it felt like I was going crazy. So thank you, Kill Screen, for that. But in the end, I'm left feeling deeply saddened for Thomasin, no longer in a good for her mood, but equally heartbroken as well for her family. Because whether or not the devil was real, it was the unrelenting cruelty of the puritanical New World that tore this family apart and destroyed them. Their faith, isolation, and fear ultimately led to their downfall, and that makes their tragedy feel all the more devastating. They didn't stand a chance because they did not have any tools in their wheelhouse that could help them deal with tragedy and loss, either religiously, like psychologically, or physically. Like, nothing. They weren't made to be there. Nothing worked. You're not supposed to be there. Take a hint. Anyway.
Yeah, it's like a whole thing.
It sure is.
Because as you said, it's like, it's so much more systemic than anything else. And a lot of it is like overflow from the influence of Catholicism and like the rule of England and like everything that was going on in England that like transferred into the culture that everyone had as they came over to America. And like, it all just made it a hot mess. Cause like part of what was happening in England was a lot of like oppressive ruling, like where they were just murdering people for doing anything that they didn't like. And it was the whole idea of when they were supposed to come over was that they were going to like work together and like love your neighbor and crap. And like, but like the society and the system in place did not set up for that at all. No one knew how to do that because that's not the culture that they lived in England. Like, it was very much based in like, you need to look out at your neighbor and like be wary of them, and like anyone who's not under God is a threat, and like
it's from 1984.
Yeah, like, you know, like you can't trust people who aren't of the same religion as you is basically what the doctrine was in England. And it was like very stressful, and all of that kind of suspicion and fear and everything else that was already so drenched into society, coupled with the fact that education was largely not widespread. The only real books that they had in their house were the Bible or religious texts. Like, they did not have context for why the world was the way that it was, what the world was doing, what the new place that they were so unfamiliar.
It was their town. We couldn't know about the world.
But like, they had no explanation for like things that we now know under science. So it's also like, there was so much unknown that everything was terrifying. So I'll get into a lot of it, but I will preface this with like, I read so much about Puritans and Protestants and Catholics and separatists and all of that. And it was super confusing because I don't think anyone, there were lots of people who said they knew the difference and then like they kind of contradicted other articles I read. So it's a little confusing. So I'm going to do my best. But if you are a scholar of this topic, I would love for you to correct me in the comments because I was figuring this out. And as a historian, I would like questions. So as Gabe said, The Witch is set in the 1630s New England, a somewhat terrifying time period that highlights how religious fervor and tragedy can transform a family overnight. It was horrifying. And what was most horrifying about it was not, as I said, like Gabe was talking about, it's like if we're saying the devil wasn't even involved here, this is just a tragedy. This is just a familial tragedy about isolation and loss and like what when you don't know why the world, like your surroundings are doing what they are. You don't know any context for what's around you. You don't know how to survive in a place where you don't have like any framework because you're not from there. That's terrifying. And like when you're not considered a person under the government or the church or the, like, you know, it was hard to exist by then. So anyone who's like, I want to time travel, you're wrong. That's silly. That's stupid, honestly. And I'm sorry. Like, unless you, honestly, even if you are away, like, why do you want to go back to the time when showers didn't exist? Like, it's weird. It's a weird thing. Why would you want to go there?
Like, shout out to all you trad wives. That's on you. Why would you want that? Oh, an egg skirt. Come on, girl.
Yeah, it's like a whole thing. And it's like also like the trad wife thing. We can talk about that.
Who's trad?
Yeah. So it's like essentially what made this time so horrible was isolation, fear, and like the belief being wielded as a weapon. So like to fully understand our characters in The Witch, we need to understand what was happening in 1630s New England and what brought Old England to New. And if you're like me and did not grow up with an understanding of religion in a way that I think, Gabe, you had a lot more like religious upbringing. I had none of that context. So I was like, I don't know what any of these words mean. I don't even know which parts of the Bible they're referencing. Like, I have no context for this. So I had to like read a lot of stuff. So if you're like me and you don't have that personal experience with religion growing up and maybe didn't have a solid understanding of the differences between Christianity and its many spinoffs, this might be especially informative for you. So what was interesting about the context surrounding this film, which is largely like, you know, the Puritanismness is like in the background of like all the awful that's happening. Yeah, it's just the setting. But it's the way that the history of England bled into America, and it explains why we have a lot of like the rhetoric and that we see today surrounding religion, like a lot of the zealous religious fervor stems from the origins of what we were.
What was the founding fathers?
Yeah. So why there is so much dehumanization of what is deemed other within more conservative spaces specifically. So this all stems back to the 1500s in the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, and the upbringing of a new king. So before we unpack Puritanism, let's dive into some history. Our characters in The Witch are new colonists from England. We hear in Thomason's words that she is old enough to remember her life in England, and so we quickly get the picture that they are new to this land. But why did they come to this land that largely did not accommodate them, was unfamiliar and not home? The Witch family is in America in response to the Protestant Reformation in England, and the Reformation began as a critique of the corruption of the Catholic Church, which like I wrote my entire senior thesis on, but that's not what we're going to talk about. But essentially, people were mad at the Catholic Church because they were greedy. They wanted money. You had to pay for your sins. It was getting largely corrupt. The popes weren't doing godly things.
Had children and money, and it was corruption, and they were paying off like to get the cardinal positions. Yeah.
It was a corrupt time, not about God at all, and all about wealth and power and like instilling capitalism across the world. Like mercantile culture had boomed and corruption grew exponentially from that point on. And that's what we see kind of bleed into England because Catholicism was largely spread across Europe. So we saw the Protestant Reformation as like a callback to like we should not be greedy. We should be following the rules of the Bible. We should be more like Jesus. And the Reformation began as a critique of that corruption. And essentially after theorized, Martin Luther nailed his thesis to the church door in 1570. Like that's when it kind of like started. And it took time to build. So right before Protestantism began to take hold in England, a new king began his rule. In 1509, King Henry VIII began his rule at 17 years old. He was just a little kid. He was in charge of a whole country. And wow, he did a weird time with his rule. The king is well known in history because he is the person who separated England from the Catholic Church in 1534. And not because he was like, I love Protestantism. I'm going to be the best Protestant king that ever was. He was like,
I want to sleep with Anne Boleyn.
Yeah, I don't want my wife anymore. And ew.
She's old and crusty.
Yeah, she's old and she didn't give me a son, so I hate her because women aren't people. The Pope told me that. So
and she's secondhand goods because she's
from my brother. And like they do say like he loved her or whatever. Like
yeah, they did love each other once.
Yeah, but he essentially gets very obsessed with continuing his line, and under mercantile culture and capitalism and Catholicism under the Pope, fun fact, women weren't people. So essentially, when you got married, your name was erased from your family tree and you were added to a new family tree and so forth and so on. And if you died, your kids were sent off into the streets and your husband would remarry a new wife and then your name would be erased and then their family line would be restarted, and as if those ones never existed. So it's a whole thing. Women weren't people. That's important context in this time. And he wasn't like, I love women and I want that. He just wanted to have more wives. He wanted a male heir because a woman heir was not considered an heir, and the Tudors were a family line within the English succession of kings. And essentially he was like, we can't have the Tudor line end with me. I must have a male heir. So he went on a whole tirade about that, and it separated from the Catholic Church, but not because he was like, I want to be good, is because he's a selfish jerk. You've likely heard a bit about him because of his divorce, and that he had 6 wives in total, 2 of which he had beheaded. So like stand up dude. Yes.
Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived.
Yeah.
2 of them were named Catherine, maybe 3 of them.
Yeah.
Gabe knows an absurd amount about Henry VIII, actually.
Yeah. So he was just like not a great dude, ultimately. Not like many kings were. And he was essentially obsessed with this. So he ended the relationship with the Catholic Church and allowed essentially the Protestant presence in England to grow and have power. So he embraced Protestantism as it granted him the separation he wanted from his wife. And during his rule, we also saw like him persecuting witchcraft. He created the first witchcraft laws that persecuted witches under the English Church and Crown. And on History.com article, it stated the newly created Church of England was similar to Catholicism in every way, except instead of the Pope carrying divine authority, it was the British Crown. Ew. So King Henry was like, I just want to be God. Pope can't be God. I want to be that. So
yeah, God chose me.
Yeah. So I'm going to take all that money and all that power, and then it's just going to be me doing it. I'm going to be doing the oppression instead of a foreign power doing the oppression. So as I said, he was not a true believer or Protestant really in any way. He just wanted power and money and did what he did, but used religion as a uniting force and witch hunts and witchcraft as a way to persecute heretics or people who did not agree with his rule. And essentially, because of this, the English Church operated in a similarly oppressive way that did not meet the standards of more conservative Protestants. So the Protestant Reformation was like, we need to be more like, we need to follow the book. We need to be less corrupt. We need to be more like Jesus. And then he was like, okay, no, but I'm going to use your word to get all these people to support me and unify England, but we're not going to do any of that. We're actually just going to give all your money to me. And every single person in this country needs to be a part of the English Church. And if you're not a part of the English Church, you deserve to die or need to get out of here. So
it's like those televangelists that are like, sell your car and your house.
Yeah. Yeah, literally. So he essentially like made it seem like a win for the Protestants, but gave them nothing. So there was a lot of Protestants that were like very unhappy with what was going on because they were more conservative. They didn't want Catholicism, but they also like didn't want what he was doing.
Yeah, it was also fake.
Yeah. So I had mentioned the king's paranoia about stability and the continuation of the Tudor line to set the tone for what comes next. And that was any deserters of the crown were met with heavy punishments. So King Henry VIII wanted to retain power. So as I said, he was the first king to enact witchcraft. And he kind of set the
laws against witchcraft.
Sorry, you're so right. Laws against witchcraft. He wasn't like, yay, witchcraft. He was like, boo, witchcraft.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah, it's an important distinction. But this set the tone for more brutal witch hunts that followed after King Henry VIII's daughter, Elizabeth I, ended her rule in 1603. There were other like rulers in the middle, but Elizabeth was like a big proponent of being more moderate and more more in line with the Protestant Reformation. So like she was more liked, but then the more conservative ones did not like her as well. And then when we got James the First, which was the switch from the Tudor reign to the Stuart reign. So James the First of Scotland.
He was Catholic, wasn't he? No.
His wife was Catholic.
Okay.
Yeah. But he took it up a notch. He was like, witchcraft? We're going to murder them. We're going to murder them. There's going to be witch hunters. We're going to... But before we get to that, there's an article I found titled England's Witchcraft or Witch Trials Were Lawful. They explained that Witchcraft Act of 1542 was England's first witchcraft law enacted during Henry VIII's reign. It established witchcraft as a crime that could be punished by death and also defined what constituted witchcraft. So using invocations of other specifically magical acts to hurt someone, get money, or behave badly towards Christianity. That's like the most important one because that's where he could just like anyone who was at the center of his rule, he could kill them because they were behaving badly towards Christianity. So being a witch, whether or not specific harm was caused to another person, was enough to get you executed. So essentially, if you were considered a witch because you behaved badly towards Christianity, you could be persecuted and executed. And this law only lasted until 1547, until Henry VIII died, but it wasn't replaced by anything until Elizabeth's reign. So that was his daughter, and she kind of continued persecuting witchcraft, and in 1563 enacted an act against conjurations, enchantments, and witchcraft, which was passed and it basically caused anyone to be killed or destroyed by use of witchcraft punishable by death. So it's a little more moderate. And then we find, what's his face? James comes in and he like really just lit everything on fire. It was like, we're going to do witch trials. We're going to be more Puritan. Like we're the Puritan time, like the Puritans fled. And then they were like, actually, nah, it's cool. We're going to have like full on witch hunts and this like really intense witch fear as a way to maintain control over society, because anyone who doesn't follow the rules, like Henry had it kind of right, I'm going to take it to the next level, essentially. So yeah, although Queen Elizabeth I was considered more moderate and appealed to the majority of the population that fell in the middle of their beliefs, she continued the Church of England and its rule, which got her excommunicated by the Pope for heresy in 1570 CE. And under Elizabethan religious law, more conservative Protestant populations in England continued to feel they were not represented by the crown. And because of this, two groups formed and faced persecution. Well, one really faced persecution, and the other one was like, I'm mad at you, but I'm not going to leave, if that makes sense. So an important piece of context that I needed when approaching this film is, what is Puritanism, and why are there like 8 different versions of it, and why are they all really confusing and mixed up? So, and what makes Protestantism and the other Christianity focused religions different from Puritanism? So according to the Cambridge Companion to Puritan, I can't say the stupid name for a religion.
Stupid word.
Puritanism. The definition of Puritanism has been up for debate, apparently, as the use of the word began in England in 1564 as an insult, as a fun fact, directed at nonconformist clergy within the newly reformed Elizabethan Church, and described as zealous Protestants who refused to wear prescribed vestments, specifically the white surplice. and who gained a reputation as opposers of the hierarchy of the church service. So essentially they were like, this is like Catholicism. That's what we didn't like. What the heck, guy? So by the early 17th century, Patrick Collinson exclaims, Puritanism had become the brand name for a certain kind of Protestant religiosity, like this kind of like fervor, social conduct, and politics, like someone who was like really overzealous about what it was to be a good Christian. So the term was used as a dig against overzealous Protestants and could not accept the more moderate religious direction of Queen Elizabeth. And this created two groups, the Puritans and the Separatists. So this is where it gets confusing. I don't know if you're already confused. This is where it gets confusing. Both believed largely the same things, but one had the support of the crown and one did not. That's where it's easy, but they get mixed up a lot in like historical texts where Puritans will be called pilgrims and vice versa. And it just gets really like convoluted. So the Puritans were essentially divided into these two groups and both fled to England to seek out America. So the Separatists and the Puritans. And the Separatists basically sought to establish their own communities in the New Worlds, but with different motivations. The Separatists were led by Reverend John Robinson, believed that the only way to live according to the biblical precepts was to leave the Church of England entirely, and they fled to the Netherlands, but eventually established the Plymouth colony in 1620. They were the ones who traveled on the Mayflower, and like that's where the Thanksgiving lie comes from, and like all that. They were pilgrims. They were separatists. They were not Puritans. The Puritans, on the other hand, believed they could reform the Church of England from within. They shared many beliefs with the Separatists, but they ultimately decided to journey to the New World in order to create an ideal English church. They settled in Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630. So the Plymouth colony, the Separatists got there first, and then the Puritans settled second in 1630. So the legacy of the
down
Pilgrims,
the street from them.
Yeah. And essentially they conflicted a lot because essentially they read the same text and believed a lot of the same things. But if you interpreted it differently than them, you were an enemy of them. And therefore, kind of like what we see happen to the family and the witch. So the legacy of the Pilgrims and Puritans has often been blurred in the minds of later generations of Americas, and not always accidentally. The Puritans are kind of mean, so they wanted to be like the Separatists, who were a little less church and state, because that's what a lot of America was formed around, was the separation of church and state. But Puritans wanted church and state to be one entity because they wanted the Church of England to continue to rule in America. So there's a lot of like blurring between the two. And the Separatists were not accepted by the Protestant church, whereas the Puritans were a more conservative arm of the church, essentially, operating with support of the crown. So my theory is that our family and the witch started as Puritans and then found themselves as Separatists without the support and safety of community, being ostracized from the support of the town. And I'll be real that the information surrounding the differences between these two is kind of confusing. So if I got any of that wrong, please let me know in the comments. I would love to know which is right. But ultimately, these two groups traveled to America. One was backed by crown, one was not. And those that were not backed to the crown faced more struggles because they faced further isolation. And also, like, when the Separatists first arrived, they experienced like way more struggles because they didn't have as much economic power as the Puritans who had come over later, because a lot of the Puritans came over specifically to set up like trading posts and like fishing villages and like economic situations, where the Separatists were like, I just want to be free of this oppressive church that's trying to kill me and my family. So very different motivations. But let's tie in witchcraft. So the precedence of fear surrounding witches was established by King Henry and further exacerbated by King James. With the creation of the King James Bible, and the Church of England continued to wield control over the people in England, and more widespread as the Bible became more accessible, and the fear of witches became widespread and understood. So King James's rule was from 1603 to 1625. And if this story happens in, what was it, 1635? 1630s. This was in response to the fact that King James was like, anyone who does not vibe with me dies. You are a witch. You will be killed. They had to flee. You know what I mean? Like, so his rule led the charge on witch hunts and witch fear. So the fear that Thomason's family has is very like real and like like valid, because that is what was widespread where they were from. And this fear grew even further when Puritanism took hold in England. So essentially mimicking what we saw in America by the Puritans. Like, this fear wasn't just a superstition, it was woven into the very fabric of their society. And a lot of like Catholic practices were also very like superstitious and based on like totems and like stuff like there were like practices that you had to do that mimic what people would describe as witchcraft in some ways nowadays. So it's like there's a lot of superstitious belief that already was widespread as a way to explain the world around them. So once in the new world where everything was scary, everything was unknown, they were in a new and unfamiliar land, they saw witches as a threat to everything they held dear, a symbol of chaos, rebellion, and a rejection of God's authority. So this fear essentially helped them control their communities, silence dissenters, and maintain a sense of order. It was a powerful force that shaped the way they lived, the way they saw the world, and even the laws they created. So witchcraft accusations were often used as a tool for political control and to resolve social conflicts. So Puritan leaders could use these accusations to discredit their opponents and consolidate their power, and neighbors could use them to settle disputes and maintain social harmony. So like people were accusing other people of witchcraft, essentially.
Like the crucible, like you were sleeping with my husband, so you're a witch.
Yeah, literally. So the fear of witchcraft also reflected the Puritans' anxieties about the unknown. The new world was a strange and unfamiliar place, and the belief in the supernatural forces provided a way to explain the unexplainable. Like your baby going missing suddenly without any other reason. Like, it doesn't make sense that wolves took the baby because Thomason was with the baby. Like, there's like things that are happening that are just like not able to be explained. So the only way that they can rationalize this when their only frame of reference about the world is religion is to believe that there are these supernatural forces, there are these witches, there are these things coming to harm them that they can't fathom or understand. It has to be the devil, has to be alive in this new land. And despite their Puritan beliefs, many colonists still held on to traditional beliefs in magic and the supernatural. So this tension between religious orthodoxy and popular beliefs created a fertile ground for witchcraft accusations. And the Puritans used ritual and charms to protect themselves from evil forces, suggest a deep-seated belief in the power of the supernatural, even if they condemned witchcraft itself. So essentially, and there was like other stuff I read where it was basically like, every time they tried to form these like really deeply connected communities, like they just didn't work because a lot of what they had established within their culture was like capitalism based, which is inherently like selfish. And like a lot of it was like, I care about my salvation, not a collective salvation. I don't care about my fellow man. I care about I get forgiven by God and I am safe. That is what matters. So it was like very much a personal experience with God instead of a collective experience with God that made like a lot of the stuff really selfish. And there was also like a belief within like Puritan culture that like they needed to purify the church. So anything that was outside of that shouldn't touch them. It was unholy. It was the devil. Like, as you said, Gabe, like it was alive. The devil was alive and everywhere. And like they had to hide from it. They could not be kind to the native population. They could not be kind to anyone, the Separatists, because they were touched by the devil in the eyes of the Puritans. Because their whole thing was like, we must purify the church, and viewed doing that as like really brutal. And then like if you even look at like how Catholicism and like the history of that bleeds into like all the beliefs of like how women were, like Thomason's story is like especially sad just because like they had no prospects at all. Like the only thing that they would have ever been given was to be married off to some like fisherman or whatever. And like they didn't have any connections to even have that happen because they were so separated from the church. So it was like there was literally nothing for her. There was no choice.
It should be noted that they weren't trying to sell her off for marriage. They were selling her off to work for a family that was of status, because at this point, she wouldn't be able to marry anyone there because they are corrupted.
Yeah. So they wouldn't even treat her like as human. If anything, like in town, she probably would have been dubbed a witch eventually anyway.
Yeah. So she didn't have a choice.
Yeah. And there's another thought that I had within that. Oh, and another piece of it was that like everything was based in work. Like the Puritan culture was oriented around the Church of England, and the Church of England, the whole thing was like the only way you have value is work. Like you have to work from sun up to sundown. Like your family works, women work, everyone works, your children works. Like there's no rights or rest. Like to enjoy things is sin. So it was just like, it explains why capitalism and like how ingrained that is into like our bones.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense within that context of like, literally you would be damned if you didn't have a strong work ethic. The devil was in you if you didn't want to work. So
yeah, idle hands are the tools of the devil.
Yeah. So it was just like, ugh, this is why everything's like this, and that sucks.
Yeah. No, I think it's really important to discuss like what brought them there, right? Because it's easy to like see them struggling with the corn and, you know, and even to be mad that they're here in the first place because it's like you don't belong here clearly. But to see like what that influence was, I think it's always important when people make such a terribly dangerous like life-altering journey like that from persecution to somewhere that is rumored to be safe, somewhere they can be free and alive, right? It's really important. It's important to note like what brought them here. Nobody just does that on a whim, right? Like everyone who came here at the time had a specific reason, and that of course drove them to do the things that they did because it was fear, because they knew they weren't supposed to be here. They couldn't go back, and so then you get migrant crime. No, I'm kidding. It's not real. And I just think it was so like all of that religious like the religion was just tied to status and your place in society. And so it drove people to do ridiculous things because they needed to retain those. And like the exchange, like the currency of society, right, was these performed acts of goodliness and purity, piety, and all of those fun religion words. But I think it's like I think it's important to have that thought when you're coming in to a film like this and to just see it from a different lens. I just think it's important to acknowledge that it was a really sad time and real people died in horrific ways. Like they had that one torture where they would just lay someone down and they put like a wood board on top of them and just slowly start stacking rocks on them until they just couldn't breathe anymore. And it would last a long time because you'd slowly just suffocate. Like more my worst nightmare. But like a lot of people know about like, throwing them in the water, and if they drown then they're witch, that kind of
King
stuff.
James would like be in on some of the torture sessions. Like he would witness them. Like it was wild because they would torture you before they burned you at the stake. Like
because they needed you to confess to it. They needed you to confess because then it verified like what they could do to you. And like any confession under torture is not applicable. That's not how that works. It doesn't make you tell the truth. It makes you tell them what they want to hear. So they'll stop. It's different. So I think like it was a really cruel time, and considering how cruel that time period is, this movie is super chill. Like the horrors are honestly in the background. It really is just that you're uncomfortable and you're sad and you feel bad for the people who are there. And instead of it being like really gratuitous and awful, it was just heart-wrenching the whole time. Like Caleb spiraling before he ultimately dies is really one of the saddest things to see because he really was trying. He was a good boy.
Yeah. The last thoughts I have, I'm sorry, I have to keep going. I just learned so many things and now I need the world to know about them. But Puritans were manifest destiny and Separatists were religiously persecuted. So it's different. So the reason why they manipulate the story is because they want you to think that the Puritans suffered religious persecution and had to come to America and then also enacted manifest destiny, when that's not what it was. The Separatists were the ones who were religiously persecuted, and then the Puritans were manifest destiny and were just like, we're going to destroy this new planet for this new place for us. So I thought that was an interesting distinction, but that's why they mix them up on purpose, to like make them seem sympathetic when they weren't. They were just colonizers who were horrible.
Yeah. And it's like, and then at the bottom of the totem are just regular people who were trying to be okay. And their religion was telling them that they were just like one little hair away from being bad. Like the fact that that Samuel and Caleb both weren't baptized really freaked them out, because that meant that they were condemned, and that was their fault because they didn't baptize them. And like that conversation with Caleb where he's just like, you're telling me that baby's bad and going to hell and is evil? That doesn't make any sense. Like that's like the first time it's like seeping in. Like it's a really good conversation. I think everything was done with intentionality. I know that some people like to make fun of it because there are some things that like I think some of the level of sewing and fabric felt a little, I was like, there's no way. It's like who was able to do that? It was like no one had a sewing machine. No one was doing that. Like those things, but I think he paid attention where it was necessary. And he told a unique story that I don't think like a lot of us have heard the crucible or the witchcraft stories time and time again. This is a different version of that. And it left me feeling much more different than I thought it was going to.
Yeah, it like initiated questions. Like I was like, I don't know enough about this time period to like say words about it. So it made me learn about a bunch of stuff. So I thought it was worth watching just for the fact it made me think about, wow, time back then. So why? Let me learn about why. Why were they left there? You know, why did they get separated? What was happening?
Yeah.
So
what was going on with them? Yeah. And I think it was like the first time I was like, what's this A24 about? Oh, interesting. And then they gave me some duds. Like it comes at night or whatever. What a disappointment. Anyway, so that's our first episode of our Satanic Panic series. We will be going weekly for the month of October. So be excited to see us more frequently because it's our spooky month. Let us know what you think about The Witch. If there are other witchy films or books or series or things that you enjoy. If you are the daughter of the witches that didn't burn, tell us about that. Tell us if that's true. What's your genealogy, bud? Where's it written? But all that being said, don't get married.
Delete your kids.
Okay, bye.